many hours you spent in dedication last year. For this year, this is our reorganizational meeting, so at this time, I will open the floor up for nominations for chair for 2022.
I'll nominate Mr. Brian Ball to continue as chair of the Board of Supervisors, sir.
We have a nomination for Mr. Brian Balt. Are there any other nominations from the floor? Not, I have a motion to close nominations and elect Mr. Vault chairman by acclamation.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Have a motion second, close nominations, elect Mr. Brian Vault chairman by acclamation. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
I'll abstain.
Chairman Vault, I turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you, sir. Before we move on, I'll echo what Mr. Bear said. 2021 was a good year, economic development wise and other areas, and knock on wood, going along with what Pastor Farley said, we hope 2022 is just as fruitful. That being said, I'll open the floor up for motion for the election of vice chair for 2022.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Mrs. Ron Lawson to continue as vice chair for this upcoming year, sir.
Right, I have a nomination for Ms. Lawson. Do I have any other nominations from the floor? Hearing none, do I have a motion to close the nominations and elect Ms. Lawson vice chair by acclamation?
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Smith. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Horning. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll abstain.
Congratulations, Ms. Lawson.
Thank you. Mr.
I will appoint Mr. Smith as chairman pro tem in our absence, which, knock on wood, I've got a pretty good track record on this many meetings, so. Next item on the agenda is our rules and procedures and meeting calendar for 2022. Mr. Baird?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is the revised rules of procedure as we have previously presented. Ms. Collins has updated it for our regular meetings. Would request the board's approval of the rules of procedure for 2022 and the meeting calendar.
Entertain a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Have a motion by Ms. Lawson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Cook. Is there any questions or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just one topic of discussion, the committee meetings, can we change the time on those now, or we wait?
I know there's been some discussion with Mr. Baird because he's had some ongoing meetings with the Blue Star Development. I think we can change them at
Yeah.
any time, but
Yeah, the committee meetings, and I'm checking here, the committee meetings are not established by their time within the rules of procedure, so we can, as the committees are established, we can work with them for establishing which dates and times work best for those.
I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Barry.
does anybody else have any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So approved. Next item on the agenda, citizens' time. We have one person signed up, Ms. Myers.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. I know your upcoming schedules are probably very, very busy, so I'd like you to pencil in these dates if you could possibly attend. There's a rodeo January 28th and 29th at the Apex Center, and then coming in February, just to pencil it in so you know, that on the 19th, there's a Blue Ridge Bash, which is cars and so on, and then for those of you that do go-kart racing, February 25 and 26. So we've got 3 upcoming events. So if you'd pencil that in, it would be appreciated.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. That's all we had signed up to speak for citizens' time, so I'll close citizens' time. Next item on the agenda is the payment of invoices. Each supervisor has received a copy of the invoices in their board package. I'll entertain a motion to approve the invoices.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry. Do I have a second? Second. Have a second by Mr. Cook. Is there any questions, discussion, or any invoice that any member would like to pull out? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
Aye.
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 So approved. Next item on our agenda is the minutes of our previous meeting from December the 28th, 2021. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Smith. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Terry. Is there any additions or corrections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Terry?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
So approved. Next item on the agenda is old business. Mr. Baird, do we have anything under old business?
I do not have any items, Mr. Chairman.
Move on to new business. The first item is our presentation from Davenport.
Mr. Chairman, we're pleased to have David Rose here with us tonight for a presentation on our capital funding. I'll preface his remarks, as you know, there's a couple projects we've talked about we're looking forward to in the upcoming year. One of them is the school Scott Memorial Project. The other is also dealing with our water and sewer projects that we have out there associated with the expansions in the industrial park. Met with Mr. Rose, and we have gone over a couple scenarios, and I'll let him go through a little bit of overview with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Congratulations on y'all's being reelected and doing it unanimously. Again, David Rose, pleasure to be here. This is one of my earliest meetings of the year, and I can't think of a more enjoyable place to be, so thank you for having me. What I'd like to do tonight is walk you through our presentation that is based upon a number of hours and work with your staff. Otherwise, we could not be here tonight. I would also add that if it wasn't the fact that the county is in excellent financial shape, we wouldn't be able to talk about this either. So you may recall when I was here one of the last times, we did some refundings. We had excellent results. We also had a whole lot of banks and brokerages that were interested, and we're going to try that again on some other debt. But interest rates are rising, so we appreciate the opportunity to be here early in the calendar year, and hopefully we can to get this done. That said, on page 1, we have done a number of things for you in the past. We did talk about modifying and updating some financial policy guidelines, and while the county has very much kept in line with some of those best practices, I know we may want to talk about, and finance may want to talk about, getting those memorialized sometime this calendar year. Nevertheless, that second bullet, we are here, as Mr. Bayer indicated, to talk about funding strategies for the renovation of the Scott Memorial Middle School and a variety of utility projects. But as part of all that, that third bullet there is to look at refunding purely for savings, not extending any debt, but perhaps shortening some of the debt on up to four United States rural development loans. So if we can do that, that will just further help the cash flows, the debt service, minimize of the county. So on the next page, page 2, I wanted to outline for you some of the challenges and things that we've seen. And the first one there is what we're all experiencing right now, which is the desire by the Federal Reserve up in Washington to raise interest rates. So they're trying to do that, and we're trying to get rates locked in as favorable as possible. So what we are recommending is that we look at what we'll call a dual track strategy. It's the same one we did last year, which is to talk to banks and brokerages, and then also talk to the state programs that are applicable. In the case of the school, it's the Virginia Public School Authority, In the case of potential utilities, it's the Virginia Resource Authority. So what we're going to try to do with your blessing is to talk first to the banks, see what they're willing or not willing to do, come back to you, and I'll show you this in a schedule, see what we get. We may get some good results, we may not. Nevertheless, if we don't get what we like, we have two choices. One, we reject it, and then the second is we move forward with the VPSA or the VRA, as the case may be. That comes later in the spring. So again, the important thing, as we did last time, is if we don't like what we get, we're under no obligation. It will not cost us anything as a county to explore these options. And I think that, from my perspective, is as good as it gets. A couple of other key points here. We know that the way your debt is structured, and I'll show you in a moment, there's a nice drop down of debt service in a couple of years. We're going to try to layer in the drop down in the debt with the new money for the middle school. And we believe we can do that under any scenario. And the important thing is that as you enter into the 23 fiscal year and you do all those deliberations in the next couple of months, the important thing is what we will not worry about is asking by staff to the board for additional dollars. We won't be needing additional dollars in debt service. We're going to be able to layer it into the nice drop down that you have in debt service. And we think, again, that's going to be helpful to the budget. It's going to be helpful to the citizens. Again, it's one less thing of, if you would, pressure that you'll put on the overall county. So if we go to page 4, I want to just talk a little bit about what we're recommending as a borrowing, and that is up to $12 million. And the important thing here is that we ultimately, if we get some additional dollars, which is a possibility, we can then reduce that borrowing size. So we get the opportunity to ask for this amount of money, but we also keep the option of paying some of that down or not ultimately closing on all $12 million. So we've got that flexibility over the next couple of months. What we did do here for your benefit is to say, if we were to borrow this $12 million and we structured it correctly, and you'll see that in the next page, we're thinking about a 20-year borrowing. And I will tell you that is considered a very solid, relatively quick pay down of debt for something that's going to last so long. Having said that, we've got two cases on interest rates, 2.25% fixed, and then added 50 basis points to 2.75%. Doesn't mean we're going to get either of those, but the relative ballpark of that, you could see here, is that if we got a 2.25%, which I frankly would be delighted if we did, it would be about $800,000 a year when we have the full payment, or it would go to about $830,000 a year if it was an extra 50 basis points. Either way, what we're going to recommend, if possible, is to lock in up to 20 years. We may get bids back that say we'll lock in for 15 years, and then the last 5 years could get readjusted. We just don't know right now. But hopefully, we're going to at least ask for a lock-in of 20 years to reduce any unknown interest rate risk. But we'll see what we get. So,
And I'll
yeah.
jump in, the 800 or the 830 is less than the two that come off, which is a little less than $1 million in the process. So we're definitely, by 2026, we should be below where we currently are on debt service.
And I think to add to Mr. Bear's point, that's why on page 5 and 6, we'll show you graphically exactly how that works. So if you look on page 5, if you see the dark green, in 2022, the debt payments are around $4.7 million. That's your existing payment. We will never go above that $4.7 million, even if rates go into the threes. And that's because the tan, if you would, is how we recommend structuring, adding in that roughly $12 million. So to Mr. Bear's point, and what we did working with staff, Regina and all, is to show you that even by adding that in, we're still below the current debt service levels of 22 and fiscal year 23. That's important. The other important point, that's the green box, says that if for some reason, and we're not recommending it, if for some reason you had other projects that were not right now contemplated, we could do about $6 million of additional projects and not go above those dark green lines. So that's what we mean by having extra capacity to do what you're thinking about doing in the general fund. And again, wanted to make sure you saw that here. And then on page 6, if interest rates went up by 50 basis points, which by the way they could, and that's very easy to see, instead of having a $6 million cushion, we have about a $5.5 million cushion. So again, either way, we're comfortably underneath where we would want to be, so we don't put additional burden on you as you move forward with the 23 budget. Okay, if that is helpful, on page 7, this is the actual dollars that I was talking about. And so, for example, case 1, in 2022, the year we're in right now, the fiscal year, that is $4.7 million we're paying in debt service. We add the new debt service, and you can see there it stays at 4.7 or less when it's revised. That's the important takeaway. And the reason for that, again, is on the existing debt, it drops down nicely, as Mr. Baer said, in the next couple of years. We go from 4.7 in just a couple of years down to 3.5 million. So we drop down more than that $800,000 of additional debt. So hopefully I haven't confused everybody, but the idea here is we're able to layer it in. I'd liken it for the citizens to if you have an existing car payment and you get a new car, you've paid off your other car in such a way that your new car payment is at or lower than your existing car payment. So we're adding it in, but it's less than what we've paid historically. And that's what we think we're going to get. Okay, if that works in terms of an explanation, I'd like to move on, Mr. Chairman, to the utility side and some refunding opportunities.
Mr. Rose,
Yes, sir.
before we jump ship on the utilities,
Yes, sir.
how does this affect, you've heard different things coming from the new governor's administration, with them putting some of the surplus money back for the literary loan program. I mean, and nobody knows what rate they're going to offer, and I'm not even sure what I can't remember what the last rate we got on
It
the
was
literary.
2%
2%.
on the 2% on the last one.
How does that play in?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman. So as Mr. Baer said, you've historically had a 2% literary loan rate. If we are able to get a 2% literary loan rate, if we were able to do that, we would look hard at that. The problem with that is the literary loan program, and your rates are very close, we hope, to 2%, but the literary loan program is front-loaded. So you actually have your largest amount of payments very early on, whereas this, we've more levelized the payments. We've made it more level. So there's an argument to be made that if we can be fairly close to 2% in what we want to do, we have a little more flexibility, cash flow flexibility for you. The other thing about the way the literary loan works, and I've worked with it for years, is we'll have to do interim financing because the backlog to get that literary loan money typically takes a few years. Never quite know when, but it will occur. From that perspective, what we're going to have to do then is we'd have to do interim financing for what might be 2 or 3 years, and then get the literary loan monies. From our perspective, if we can know right up front that we're very close to that 2%, and we'll find that out, then we can exercise that. Now, the other possibility here is that if you have moved in the composite index beyond 2%, we can find that out as well, because it goes immediately to 3% for you. There's no 1% composite. So we're gonna look at that, but right now, we think that if we can get close to 2%, we like the flexibility, we like the ability to lock it in and not worry about what the state may or may not do. The other thing, as we talked about, is with this money, the other advantage too is that it's more flexible in terms of what you may have already done with regard to bidding and things like that nature. The literary loan just has a lot of strings attached to it. And then lastly, when I look at all this, remember what I had said earlier, if indeed we structure this right, and there is somewhat of about 2.3 million, there could be some outside dollars, then we have the ability most easily to pay that down, if you would. So I'm thinking that is all worth something to us in terms of being somewhat close to the 2%. So that's our thinking.
And the 2.3 million, just to let y'all know where that is coming from, in the governor's proposed budget, with the templates that are online under the school finance, they show, in all the money that's coming to the localities, they show $2.3 million in school construction funds. But there's not a lot of information that goes with that right now. So that's why he had the comment about, look at borrowing 12, but if that 2.3 million comes from the state, and that's the outgoing governor's budget, there's still gonna be the new governor's budget, it's gonna be a general, both House and Senate budget. We don't know what that number will be, but if they are looking at putting money towards it, then we just either lower what we borrow, or if we've already borrowed, we pay that part off and get down to where we're only paying 10 million over the next 20 years. So we're trying to keep it as flexible as we can, and trying to lock in on interest rates before they go up, but have the ability to take the state money that comes in to go toward this project.
And looking at the chart that Mr. Rose has given us, it looks like it puts us in a good position to look at, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but, I've said before, my concern is not so much the Scott project as the Spiller project. And, looking at this chart and knowing what debt service is gonna fall off, it looks like we're in pretty good, looking down the road. Because I think that's gonna be an expensive one.
Yeah, you really are in good shape. I think, again, and it's just been a smart way of approaching this the last few years. So this will just continue that. And again, if we don't like what we see, then we're not obligated to move forward. It's that simple. So we'll, I'll be back. I've been back in 40 years. I've given some bad news to boards that things don't always work out, and we've done that. So hopefully I won't be the case, but it won't be the first time. So, okay.
But before we move on, does that make sense to everyone, what we're looking at? Does that, along the lines of what we talked about before with everything?
What's and I guess, I know we've thrown estimate numbers out. On the Scott project, I think we've got more concrete numbers on the utility side, but, what's our time frame? Because, like Mr. Rose said, the federal government's pushing to raise these interest rates, and I don't wanna drag their feet, because when you're talking about that much money,
He's got a calendar at the end of the presentation that he's gonna get to answer that question.
see how smart I am,
You just open your book backwards.
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
But that's the question, and that's where we need to have a little bit of discussion. We'll get to the end of this, of, going ahead and pulling the trigger and putting this out for bid.
Okay, so on page 9, it's the refunding candidates, and I use the word potential. There's about $3.5 million of outstanding loans. All of them, as you can see there, hover in the mid 4% range, roughly, a little bit. The last loan is a little over 4%. The good thing about it, they're prepayable anytime without penalty. So the focus here is, if we can indeed get some responses that make sense and allow us to bring down the costs, then we want to do that. And so we ran some preliminary cases, and I'll show you on page 10 what it looks like. Again, don't know if we're going to be able to get this. The current market was as of literally last week, and the current market is not as good as last week. We've lost some ground. The Fed has raised the rates, but we haven't lost 50 basis points. So if you look in between there, we're still looking at savings that are probably north of $700,000, and that's taken into consideration, like we did last time, any cost of issuance that they charge us, the banks charge us, what have you. And then the very important factor here is that third column where it says net present value savings percent. You see it's like 18% and 12%. What you may recall, and you've got a lot in front of you, but when I was here last time, the way we look at what makes sense to do, a bona fide refunding that is not just churning your interest rates, is the state says anything north of 3 to 4% makes sense. So here you are basically at 3 to 4 times that level of savings. So that's the way in which we, working with legal counsel, say this would make sense and we would recommend it from a best practices. If that were, let's say, 2%, we would not recommend it. That's too low. The answer would be you're better off to wait unless there's some other circumstances we're not aware of. So that's where we show that to you. It's like, I like to call it the truth in lending, like the old days on borrowing a car. That's really what the APR is, which is really telling you, are you really saving money or moving cash flows around? And this is very much a very nice savings if we can do it, but we'll see. We'll see, okay? So page 11 is what that looks like, and that's basically in the current market as of last week. Like I said, I don't think we're going to get that current market as of last week, but what we've done basically here is we've been able to save money, depending on which fiscal years, in every fiscal year, starting in 2023 out to 2051. And that dark green out to 2058, that's your existing utility debt, goes all the way out to there. And you noticed I said earlier with the schools, we're only going to do 20 years. But on the utility side, with rural development, they are typically borrowing, or you're borrowing from them at 40 years. That's the way the typical rural development works for us here in Virginia. Any other questions, maybe while I'm going on that? So that we'll be doing simultaneously with the new money for schools. They don't have to be combined, they'd be separate accounts, be accounted for separately. One might work, other might not. We may recommend doing one and not doing the other. We're going to make sure we ask the banks to give us that flexibility. As I said earlier, if we want to wait or do something tied to literary loans, I don't think we will, but you never know. Or if we want to do something tied to Virginia Public School Authority, the downside to that is we're then waiting about 3 more months to lock in rates. We don't know what those are. That's in April. That's what the Virginia Public School Authority borrows in April typically. And then, again, it's a little bit more locked in. The prepayment is much less flexible than going to the banks. We could not just all of a sudden tell them we want to pay down $2.3 million. We would not be able to do that as easily. It would cost us some money to do that. So with that said, let's turn to the third component, if you would, of our presentation on page 12, and that's utility new money needs. And so what we did is we've had some lengthy discussions with staff. There's a variety of moving parts, and I will defer to Mr. Bear on this. But what we suggested was while we are looking at new money and refunding, why don't we think about perhaps doing some interim funding? And we picked a number of $6 million. That's not set in stone, We can make it higher, we can make it lower, really not looking at making it higher, though, that would be sort of the top. And we would say to the banks, give us some sort of funding strategy for some interim dollars based upon the fact that we don't want to go into the county's existing reserves and deplete those, or to be in a mode where we don't know exactly how long it takes to get those monies back for our county reserves. So with that said, we would like to think about some interim financing. We certainly think we ask for it, see what we get, and then working with staff, we may or may not recommend all of it, we may recommend none of it. But again, the beauty of all this is think of this as almost 3 separate transactions being asked for all at once. And that's what we like about it. And it may be different banks, and we've had that in the past, that actually win different pieces of the request. So it gets a little complex, but I think from our perspective, nothing ventured, nothing gained. That's what we did the last go-round. If you remember, we started out with the refunding, and then we ended up adding the new money to it. But they were separate transaction pieces, so one didn't cloud the other, but we ended up getting what we were hoped for on both of those fronts. So we're thinking about this similarly. So if that is understandable, let's go to what you asked for, Mr. Chairman, and what Mr. Baer indicated, and that is pages 14 and 15. So I indicated on page 14 this dual track approach. Track 1, again, going to the banks directly, doing a formal request for proposal like we've done, making sure all the various things we'd like to see are in there, and then, if we need to, in part or in whole, we do track 2, which is the VRA and/or VPSA. And again, we'll be back to see you in February if you'll have us, and we'll show you that on the schedule to talk about whether or not they make sense, what have you. But again, we're going to still move forward and apply to those things. We still have the work to do, and that really falls to us to a large extent and staff, in spite of the fact I know we've got budget time coming, but we limit that because it is especially busy for y'all. So having said that, let's just go to page 15. This is the schedule. And so here we are on the bank side. It's early January. That's why I'm in front of you, and we're going to ask for your permission to send out these requests. We hope to get them back, something good, we hope, by early February. It really won't be late January, it'll be early February, mid-February. And then we would be in front of you on the 22nd of February. We understand that's a public meeting. We would also ask for you to set up so that we could have a public hearing, because as you recall, anytime we do new money of any kind, we still have to have a public hearing, and that would held simultaneously. And by the way, that public hearing would happen even if we decided not to do anything, but to wait to later in April and May timeframe. That public hearing would then still be applicable. So hopefully we strike gold like we did last time. We have some good information for you and things that you like come the February 22nd. And then we basically move to close with the known rates and charges at the end of February, early March. That's the ideal. On the right-hand side, if things don't go as planned, we're still going to simultaneously apply to VRA for February 4th. We'll have the school board take some action on the 10th of February. Those applications are due in mid-February. And then again, we'll see what it looks like, and we'll have the same public hearing on the 22nd. March 8th is a deadline for approvals. And then again, the bond sales are not exactly set by the state, but it's roughly mid to late April, and that's when it gets locked in. So we would very much like to be in a mode where we say, we've got some good rates. That doesn't mean, by the way, though, that if we decide that and, you know, the VRA or VPSA looks better come April, we'll have to talk about that. We may end up being in a mode where they don't let us convert, they may not let us out of it, but we're gonna see how close we get to that low 2% range. And if we do, I think it would be hard to argue that we're not putting ourselves in a good position. As I said, the one thing about VRA and VPSA, they're not as flexible in the repayment as typically the banks are. Banks are typically much more flexible. So again, there's some trade-offs in all of this, and we'll have talked through with your staff at great length before we come in front of you on hopefully February 22nd to give you a report. With that, I don't know, Mr. Bear, you want to add anything? And it's not so straightforward, I realize, a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts.
That's the schedule. So,
Well, what do I mean? It's clear as, I was gonna say clear as mud, but, Mr. Rose, you do a good job. I mean, it's very clear. What do we need to do to move forward? Do we need to
well,
take any action?
basically, if you're fine with this, and basically it's three components, I mean, he's described them clearly. Look at borrowing 12 million for the school, have a prepay clause on it, or close for less if we find out something different. Look at the refi, and then, the 6 million, as you all know, we've got a water tank project we're working on, we've got a wastewater treatment plant project we're working on. There's reimbursables that come off there, but we may need the money up front to pay for those, and that would give us a pool of money to do that without locking in, because any grants we're able to get, any cost savings Mr. Wright comes up with is in the process. When we get to the end, then determine what we need to borrow long-term for any of our capital projects. So, the action that I would recommend tonight, Mr. Chairman, is if the board's acceptable to it, authorize Davenport to go ahead and start the process of the dual track with the competitive solicitations for the direct loans, and then also the VRA, VPSA option is the backup.
What, when you talk about the reserves, is there a number that gets us the best rate? I mean, what should we have in reserve? At a bare minimum, what should we have in reserve?
Well, I would have to take a look once again, Mr. Cook, at your reserves, but we knew that in great detail last year, and you've done a very good job of having a very solid reserve. There's no such thing as a bare minimum. Well, maybe there is, but if you're at a bare minimum, you're not going to look nearly as good to the banks as you have. So that's one thing. The other thing is, as interest rates rise, right now it hasn't been very good, but as they rise, those dollars that are sitting there that are not only helping your credit, but you also will get interest earnings off of that, which helps your general fund. A lot of people don't realize that. So that's the second important thing. You don't want to lose that. I think the third thing about these reserves is that when they're substantial like they are, it allows you to avoid having to do short-term borrowing to pay bills. Some of your neighbors have to do that, and that's just really a terrible waste of taxpayer money to have to go borrow money just to pay bills. So we want to keep away from that. That's also one of the reasons you have a very substantial reserves to avoid that problem. But at the end of the day, we gave and talked about, I don't have in front of me, a reserve policy, and you're very much in there and above that, which is good. So I feel comfortable that when we go to the banks, they will look at the credit as they have in the past and say, Wythe County not only pays its bills, but it's got cushion, and that's important. So,
Were you
Yeah.
talking about when you continue to raise the reserve amount, we're still high enough that we're getting the best that we can get right now?
I think so. I think so right now. I mean, again, I haven't seen the 21 audit, but I know that's coming in a couple weeks, the next meeting. But you've done well in terms of, of all this. But then again, at the same time, there is some dollars that may ultimately be used strategically, and it's been done in the past, so that you can pay some cash for capital projects and do some things you don't have to just borrow. We don't want to just see you borrow for everything. That's something that we don't want to do, obviously. So we want to do a combination.
So we
So,
don't wanna get below the place where we can.
No.
no, not even
And
close.
financially, we are probably in better shape than we were 2 years ago when we did the last borrowing. So, and I would love for him to get 1.6 1.77% new money for us again, but I
don't
don't
see it.
think he's gonna
Don't
get
see it.
1.77 this time. But,
No.
nothing from the county finances have changed enough over the last 2 years that would hurt us on any of that. It's really just gonna be where the market is that's out there.
Exactly.
And, you know, none of us, he's a financial forecaster, not us.
No, I'm
but
not.
None of
I'm
us
definitely
think interest rates are gonna drop down any this upcoming year.
And I'm not, and again, I have no forecast knowledge other than just simply what the Federal Reserve is saying. We just don't know.
And I'm sure eventually we're gonna make it back. But, you know, we're about to spend quite a bit of money getting sewer and and stuff out here to Project Park, which, you know, for Blue Star I mean, it's good for us.
Yep.
But at the same time, I wouldn't wanna drop our reserve down to where it
Right.
affects our credit. So,
Right.
you know, I was just.
We're,
wondering if
we're
there's-
on the same wavelength. We're talking about the same wavelength, and, like you said, not only we're doing that, but we've also talked about how to look at, if we can get the refundings to work, if we can, at a certain level, then how we take some of those savings, meaning where do we take the drop down in the savings, so that if indeed, when we have some new money borrowing for utilities, we can sort of layer that in and not have as much an impact. We don't have the same cushion that we do with the general fund. We don't have nearly that kind of big cushion.
And the 6 million that you're talking about, is that gonna be like for the railroad and the
Those are
sewer
the
line
things
and
that
all
I'm
those things?
looking at those for exactly what you just said. If we need those for interim financing for, like, for example, Mr. Wright's working on a tank for us. That water tank's gonna cost probably in the neighborhood of $5 million. We're looking at getting $2.5 million from CDBG. But that will be like reimbursed to us. So we have this $6 million that's sitting out there that we could use. We could pay that on. Then when we get reimbursed $2.5 million from CDBG, we take that and we pay off that interim financing note, and that way we've not pulled out a lot out of some of the reserve, not pulled our reserves down, but we've used the money wisely until we get reimbursed. Same thing with $5 million that we're looking at getting from, applying to EDA for the water treatment expansion, things like that. So it would just be to keep things balanced until we get the reimbursements from those funding agencies. If we don't have to use it, we won't use it. That would be the goal. If we don't have to, we won't. But if we do, we have it in place, borrow, get the money in, 60, 90, 180 days later, pay that off.
Well, I mean, once STS and Blue Star and all of them get going, we should make enough taxes to raise our reserve up. I didn't want to get too low right now.
Right.
Right.
Understood, absolutely.
So I'm sorry, Coach.
Does anybody else have any discussion? I'll entertain a motion to authorize Davenport to move forward on the dual track
So moved.
financing.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Cook. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Smith. Is there any more questions or discussion? Here now we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cook?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So approved.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr.
Hope to
Rhodes.
come back with some good news. Hope to. All right, thank you. Have a good New Year.
See if you can do
Thank you
something
so
about,
much.
see if you can do something about gas prices too. All right, next item on the agenda is a body worn camera grant.
Request that the board authorize receipt of this grant and to amend and appropriate the same to the sheriff's budget.
Entertain a motion to accept
$25,000.
the grant and amend and appropriate $25,000.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Smith. Is there any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Terry?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Abstain.
Aye.
So approved. Next item is the Fort Chiswell well termination agreement. Mr. Bear, is that yours?
Yes, we have 2 wells that are no longer in service. Both of them are located off of Orion Lane, which most of you all are familiar with over there. we still have a water tank all the way up at the end of Orion Lane, but these are two wells. The county attorney has prepared a lease termination agreement, basically just clarifying the language in the original lease that basically we are divesting our interest in this. We no longer use either one of these wells. But instead of tearing everything out and returning it as normal, the current landowner has expressed interest in using that for processing. So this just clarifies that we're ceasing to use it, but we will not tear everything out. The only thing we have left to do before we finalize this, we will be removing a generator that's on site. But I would request board's approval of this termination agreement.
Entertain a motion to approve the termination agreement as presented.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Smith. Do I have a second? Have a second by Mr. Cook. Is there any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote for Mr. Cook.
Aye.
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 So approved. Next item on the agenda is our budget calendar for FY 22-23.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would request the board's approval of this. The main dates that I would emphasize to you all is 3/14 through 3/18 is the budget presentation week for those to come here and make their presentations. An aggressive schedule of reviewing the budget and setting a tax levy by 4/12. The reason for that, this is a year that it follows a reassessment, and depending on the tax rate we adopt, it may require a 30-day notification of that tax rate. And so looking at trying to establish that by the 12th so we could advertise that. In that situation, we can, typically, y'all may be aware, we've always had the public hearing on the tax rate on the same night that we've had the public hearing on the budget. Since it's a year following reassessment, we were not able to have them on the same night. So what is proposed is May 17th, which is the Tuesday between your first and second meeting for a public hearing on the tax levy, and then the following week for the public hearing on the county budget and the school board budget. And looked at adopting everything by the June 14th meeting.
Does anybody have any questions?
Just to clarify, the only dates that we need to make sure that we wouldn't normally be here is the March dates.
March
that you
14th through 18th, and then May 17th. Yes, sir.
Okay. Just so we'll know when to ask off.
Does anybody else have any questions? Entertain a motion to approve the budget and calendar as
So
presented.
moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Horny. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Cook. Any questions?
Oh, it's Terry, not Cook.
I'm sorry, Mr. Terry. We moved Mr. Smith, and it's gonna take a while. Have a motion, a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So approved.
No better way than to spend it, St. Patrick's Day again, than in budget.
I was just
I will wear
thinking
my green again.
He went from 3 days to 5 days.
I'm hoping it's less, but I was just giving you a worst case scenario.
That's a ballpark.
I'm too old to play ball.
All right, next item on the agenda is our Board of Equalization appointments. We have Ms. Ball here, Mr. Baird.
Just as the letter states there, Commissioner Vaught's been working to find members to serve on our Board of Equalization. Pardon me if I'm repeating anything it's not known, but basically, the assessors are completing the assessment. They will have their Board of Assessors meet. Following their Board of Assessors meetings, we have Board of Equalization meeting, which is made up of the citizens of Wythe County, to hear the complaints or concerns that those residents have regarding that. I would request the appointment of these individuals as presented by Ms. Vaught.
Entertain a motion to appoint the individuals as presented by Ms. Ball.
So moved.
Have a motion by Ms. Lawson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Cook. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations and thank those folks for serving. Before we move on, speaking of the reassessment, did you,
I have made contact with them. I have not heard back from them, but I am working with them on, seeing if they can have in-person meetings for those that want to meet in person.
and I talked to Mr. Bear the other day. I didn't catch it when the gentleman at the last meeting was making his presentation, but when I went back and watched the meeting video, I called it and he said that they were not going to meet in person for people that had concerns, that they were going to do it over the phone or virtual or whatever, and I personally have a problem with that because they're meeting people in person on their property when they reassess. So if they can do it in the driveway, they can do it at the courthouse. But that's my opinion, but if you'll just follow up and let us know what that deal is.
Just one additional item, Mr. Chairman, Board of Equalization. Ms. Williams and I will review our budget, what's going to be left of what we're paying the firm and what's out there. But we may need to amend our budget for the part-time pay for these individuals to serve on, under the Board of Equalization. So that may be coming forth at the next meeting to see what we need to amend and appropriate to pay those individuals for their service. And we'll do it off the best guesses that we have of how long we think they'll serve him. And if it takes longer, we'll come back and amend from there.
Anything else on that, Mr. Bear?
No, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Falk.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is appointments. And you want me to just do chair appointments and get those knocked out of the way?
That'd be super, yes, sir.
All right, chair appointments. Budget Committee would be myself, Mr. Terry, Mr. Smith. Buildings and Grounds Committee would be Mr. Cook, myself, and Mr. Burnett. Economic Development Committee, Mr. Cook, Mr. Smith, Mr. Terry. Fire and Rescue Committee, Ms. Lawson, Mr. Terry, and congratulations, Mr. Smith. Liaison Clerk of the Circuit Court, Mr. Terry. Liaison Commissioner of Revenue, Mr. Cook. I will appoint myself as liaison for Commonwealth Attorney. Planning Commission, Mr. Burnett. Recreation Commission, Mr. Smith. School Board Liaison, Ms. Lawson. Sheriff's Liaison, Mr. Smith. Treasurer's Liaison, Mr. Horny. Personnel Committee will be Mr. Cook, Ms. Lawson, Mr. Smith. Town and County Committee for the retreat will be myself and Mr. Horny. Town and County Committee for Whitfield will be Ms. Lawson, Mr. Cook. Water and Wastewater Committee will be Mr. Horny, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Cook. And I think that's all the chair appointments. Is that right, Ms. Collins?
Just want to check on your liaisons. Commissioner of Revenue was Cook,
Yes.
Planning Commission Burnett,
Yes.
School Board Lawson,
Yes.
Treasurer Horny. Okay.
And I may have overlooked it, but are we still doing the Wall of Honor, or does that just fall under the Town and County Committee?
I didn't.
I mean, we never meet, we meet
It
like once a
may
year, so
not
I
have
didn't know.
expired, so that may be why it's not on the list, so you're still on
Oh,
that.
okay,
It's
gotcha.
more than likely.
I just want to make sure
Or it might be on there.
that I don't miss
in
it.
perpetuity, where you're on there forever.
Oh, that's nice.
Till death do you part.
Okay, thank you.
And on the other, appointments, where do you want to start? Mr. Bear, Ms. Collins, either one? I got my papers mixed up, I'm sorry.
We'll just start from the top of the paper that's in the package. We'll start with the Appalachian Regional Authority. 2 members' terms expired December 31st, 21. Barry Ayers, who had just been appointed, and I don't remember which unfulfilled term that is, and also Tam Topham.
he's in, has anybody talked to him about serving?
I have not, sir.
I do believe they were at the meetings the other day when they met Monday, so I would assume they're still interested in serving, but I have not talked to them.
Can we appoint both of them with one action?
Yes, sir.
Entertain a motion to reappoint Mr. Ayers and Mr. Topham.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Smith. Is there any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Congratulations. Next is the Chief Local Elected Official Board, the Mount Rogers New River Workforce Investment Board. I think it's,
I don't think you need to take any action on that. That's usually the chairman of the board in that situation, so congratulations, sir.
next one is District Three Governmental Co-op. I don't mind serving on it. It's a good organization.
If Mr. Cook is interested in serving as alternate on that, I would recommend a motion to appoint both of those.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Third.
I have a motion by Mr. Terry and a second by Mr. Smith. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
For your insurance committee, Mr. Chairman, I would like to add Mr. Hankins to that list and reappoint all of those.
Add Mr. Hankins or subtract yourself and add Mr. Hankins?
Well, I obviously would not object to that at all. But add Mr. Hankins at this time.
Entertain a motion to reappoint all the members of the insurance committee and add Mr. Hankins.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Horning. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Hankins. Lead Mines Rescue Squad. We have Mr. Watts and Miss Lovingood.
The clerk indicates both are eligible to be reappointed.
I make that motion that we reappoint both of them.
Have a motion by Mr. Smith. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Ms. Lawson. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations. Mount Rogers Community Service Board, we have Barbara, is it Bartlett?
Yes,
I believe she's eligible, isn't she?
I do believe.
Ms.
I'd
Bartlett?
recommend appointing and
Entertain a motion to reappoint Ms. Bartlett.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Have a second by Ms. Lawson. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations. Mount Rogers Planning District,
two things there. One, we had a vacancy from where I believe Mr. Anderson left, and then we had a Earl Clifford who has served for many, many years, and it would probably be appropriate for us to send a letter to him if Ms. Castle can go back and determine how many years he served on that to him to express his appreciation. But that's the two vacancies that we have to fill on that commission. We have not received any applicants that I'm aware of out there. I'm willing to work with staff to check with maybe some, if y'all got any former, people, I mean, basically, it's good to have people that are actively involved with the community and interested in the community that's been involved with it. If there's any names or any former board members or school board members or anybody that you know that's got an interest in it, Brian can tell you a lot more about their meetings, but they do a lot of funding of projects and helping to find funding and voting on projects to our entire Mount Rogers area.
if, It'd be nice to have somebody from the eastern end of the county on there if we could find somebody. No pressure, Jamie.
I've already started thinking there.
I mean,
I'd rather leave it blank and y'all talk to some people, and I'll throw you some ideas of who I've got that's come up, and we'll see if we can come up with somebody there.
Okay.
all right, next, Mount Rogers Planning District Commission Transportation Technical Committee. Entertain a motion to reappoint Mr. Johnny Kinser.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Smith. Do I have a second? Have
Second,
a second by Mr. Ms.
it
Lawson.
doesn't matter.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? New River Community Corrections Board, I don't mind serving on it.
Motion to reappoint them.
Have a motion by Mr. Horny, a second by Mr. Smith. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Congratulations. New River Highlands, Conservation District. Unfortunately, we lost Mr. Snap, who served
Many years.
many years. I don't know if,
Yeah, I had hoped that we would be reappointing Mr. Snap and then determine if he was not gonna be able to serve, unfortunately, as of the events of 2 days ago. I don't have a recommendation right now, but, we may be able, if anyone, maybe Junior may could help us from the agricultural community to see if there's someone that has some interest, in filling that position.
and I know this last thing on their mind, but, I don't know if his son would be interested. I mean, Phil was on it for years, and I'm sure his son knows the ins and outs of it.
That's what I was wondering, was how much Brad knows about it.
So we'll just leave that open. Come back to it. New River, the next one is Mr. Hufford. Mr. Hufford's been on there for several years. I'll entertain a motion to reappoint him.
So moved.
Think maybe he might want to become a primary instead of an alternate?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I just realized, I didn't notice that alternate till you said that. So,
We could contact him as well and see if he wants to come as alternate, if you wanna leave both of these right now, if you wanna appoint him as alternate, then we
we'll
can come back
appoint him
and,
as alternate in
and see
case,
if he wants.
yeah.
Okay.
Entertain a motion to reappoint him as an alternate.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry, a second by Mr. Cook. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Congratulations. New River Valley Regional Jail Authority, as much as it pains me to say it, I'll do that one again.
Make that motion, sir.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry, to have a second.
Second.
Have a second by Ms. Lawson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations to me. New River Valley Regional Jail Alternate, Mr. Barrett.
Well, Mr. Chairman, this would be a good opportunity
For
for
Mr.
Mr. Hankins to
Hankins.
broaden his horizons and meet county administrators from other counties. And, if you all would so desire, I would be willing to give up my seat as an alternate.
Sheriff Foster's in attendance.
Would you like that position?
Fortunately, it's only once every other month, basically, so,
I'll entertain a motion to appoint Mr. Hankins as the alternate to the Regional Jail Authority.
So moved.
Have a, you noticed who made that motion, Ms. Lawson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Terry.
You can tell he's excited.
As long as I know who's tired of putting
Yeah. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, besides Mr. Hankins? Congratulations. I done lost my place.
Planning commission.
planning commission.
Planning Commission, I have not talked to, Ms. Lyle, but I will make a motion to reappoint her from my district.
Whether she wants it or not, huh?
I'll make the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Horny. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I will try to remember to tell her. Chris King, which,
It's me. I'll make
Oh.
a motion that we reappoint Chris King to the planning commission.
have a motion to reappoint Mr. King. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Horny. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, Mr. Walk is from Mr. Burnett's district, so
We can wait on that. The bylaws are written, he continues to serve until till one is reappointed, so we can have him do that in the January meeting.
the Wythe Grayson Regional Library Board, Ms. Buck, I did speak to Ms. Buck, who said she was interested in being reappointed after Ms. Collins told her she was up for reappointment. I wasn't gonna tell her that, it was gonna be a sneak attack. So I'll entertain a motion to reappoint Ms. Buck.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry, do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Ms. Lawson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations.
Mr. Chairman, there is one additional one. The JPSA, for the, Mr. Coy McRoberts had 1 year left on his term to finish that out.
Ms. Lawson, are you interested in
And which one?
the JPSA?
Trash.
Sure.
Welcome aboard.
What's-
They meet
Number
once a
7.
month on the third Tuesday of the month.
Usually a 6-hour meeting, but
Yeah.
we do have NABs.
Is that board appointed or chair appointed?
Board appointed, I
So
believe.
entertain a motion to appoint Ms. Lawson.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry.
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Horn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, you got big shoes to fill.
Soon like. So you said the third Tuesday of the month?
Yes,
Okay.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. And it takes 15 minutes contrary to what Mr. Horny says, unless I'm at the meeting, and it takes 45 minutes.
So we try to keep him locked out.
Anything else under appointments?
I do have one thing, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Under the New River Regional Water Committee meeting, they do that on like the third Thursday at 10 a.m. Is there anybody that can do that? It's about impossible for me with my work schedule to do that one now.
I can't even find that one.
It's not on
not
here,
on.
it's, he's appointed for, probably at least another 3-year term or whatever, so, I will say, going into all the things we are doing and the expansion of the Regional Water Authority and everything, attendance is critical, and I appreciate you saying that. If it's gonna be a conflict, it would be good if someone was maybe, but it is the third Thursday.
The third Thursday.
Does it have to be a board member?
I believe it does. I will look at that and see. I can look at that and see.
I would volunteer, but I'm in the same situation with work. It would be hit or miss for me,
Yeah.
so.
I thought about Gene and Mr. Cook.
Mr. Cook?
I'm checking my Thursday. What time?
10 a.m.
Well, that's before I get up. Tired.
It was a retirement life.
Currently, we're meeting at Austin'sville, at the water treatment plant for those meetings.
All right.
I would request, Mr. Chairman, if you would officially indicate that you are resigning from that board and give us a letter to that effect.
Okay.
To go with it, but if we would go ahead and then reappoint or appoint Mr. Cook to fulfill the unfinished term of Mr. Terry.
So we can go, you want us to go ahead and,
If you want to go ahead and state you'd like to resign from that, then
I need to resign from the Water Committee Board, Mr. Chairman, just
why
because
don't
of
you make a,
work schedule.
why don't you make a motion to appoint Mr. Cook to your unfulfilled term?
And I'll make a motion to
I'll second.
We have a second by Ms. Lawson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Cook, I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else under appointments?
I will ask Ms. Collins to make a note. We need to confirm if that is, I believe that's one of the boards that we'll need Mr. Cook to go down and get sworn in,
Yes,
for
sir.
that board. So,
Oh, well, we didn't say that when we started it.
Yeah, I forgot, we had.
Well, they're open till 5 at Circuit Court, so you're.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Barry?
I'll ask Ms. Collins if that's everything on appointments to the best of your knowledge.
Ms. Vaught, do you have anything, or were you just here for the? Okay. Sheriff, you have anything? Anything else under new business?
No, sir.
All right, moving on to Board of Supervisors time, for the first time, for the first person, Mr. Cook,
I have nothing.
Ms. Lawson,
I have nothing at this time.
I got some.
imagine that. Smith,
Mr. Mayor, I have had several complaints again about Route 94 from the intersection of 52 through the curves at Jewel Lane about the speed. So I don't know if Mr. Burnett has had anyone reach out to them, but I've had several people reach out, especially through the area right before Ghent Lane, on the Fort Chisholm High School side. So.
And I'll send something tomorrow, but I'll ask the sheriff if we can do anything.
Conduct the speed study here at that spot, at that place.
We did. We had one set at the residence right across from Mr. Johnson's, and then we had one set up next to St. Paul PH Church as well. But the citizens that live in the curve up on the hill on the right, if you're going south on 94, they're concerned about getting hit coming out or turning in. So. And then the last thing I got, I know we met with the Apex board here, and we talked about revisiting the business plan that Mr. Wythe had talked about. Are we still going to honor that as a board?
I said last time that I just feel like we're wasting their time. That's just my opinion. I requested, that they start showing us their financials, but I mean, they're working, they're using so much of their personal time to do this, and then we're not really clear of how we're moving forward, so it's whatever you all think. That's just my opinion.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
have you seen a business plan, or?
I have not seen a business plan, no. I was just replaying the meetings that we'd had, and they did, when they were here, they talked about bringing it, and it wasn't, he didn't know if it would be a complete, is the way the conversation ended, I think, and I just wanted to make sure.
At their meetings, January 3rd, 4th, whatever that date was, he had a draft, not a finalized version of that plan of what he had been working on. It had some corrections and things to do, but he did hand that out to the authority just to look at, to see what was happening, but it was not finalized at that time.
Anything else, Mr. Smith?
That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Horny?
I had somebody ask me something about the cigarette tax, so I figured it's easier for me to ask you than it is for me to look it up. Is it just cigarettes, or is it tobacco products?
Just cigarettes.
Okay, that's what I thought. It went into effect January 1st?
Yes.
Is it our responsibility to notify the stores, or how's that work?
It is all handled through Mount Rogers PDC. They are working with all of the distributors that supply all of the stores. This is different than like the stores in Wytheville that would go to the treasurer's office in Wytheville and buy the stamps to put on the package. These stamps are applied by the distributors at the same time that the state seal is put on there. So the distributors that are supplying the cigarettes and reporting that information should have a dual seal on the bottom of the package at this point in time. So, if you went into the Speedwell market right now and picked up a pack of cigarettes, on the bottom of it should be a stamp, that's on there that is a dual stamp, that is Mount Rogers, tax stamp and the state of Virginia tax stamp on it.
Cause this retailer, she said she had hadn't heard anything about it, and her distributor told her that she needed to make sure she got that tax.
If you'll
He
send
was
me
like-
if you'll send me the email of which store that is,
Well, you know what
I'll-
store it is.
I will make certain that I, have Aaron Sizemore or Mr. Hounshell, contact them to make certain that their distributor is on that list.
You can take a guess, there's only 2 stores in the district.
It's big, and one of them's got one mean woman that runs it, and I'm not dealing with my sister.
Anything else, Mr. Horny?
That's it.
Mr. Terry?
Just one thing, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barry, can we reach out to VDOT? Last night at the fire and rescue meeting, several of the first responders were talking about Castleton Road. Said that the shoulders have gotten really bad shape. It's posing pretty big hazards for school buses and rescue personnel vehicles down there.
And it's shoulders primarily?
So, yes, I think Chief Stitt said somewhere along the shoulders, there's a hole big enough you'll lose a whole bus if you drop off and catch it just right. He said it got really, really bad over the past year.
And he
Okay.
said, what's the road called, Little Creek, or Little Reed Creek?
Little Reed Island.
Little Reed Island,
Yeah.
yeah.
He said that road as well.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Terry?
That's all I had tonight, Mr. Chairman.
I got a few things. First of all, thank you for, placing me back in the chair spot. Come back in 6 months and maybe I won't say thank you, but tonight I'll say thank you. Along the same lines of what other people were talking about, BDOT, I had somebody contact me the other day, that actually lives in Mr. Smith's district. And he drives a bus part-time and had an activity bus somewhere out in, I don't remember if it was Russell County or what, but he said they had some 2-lane roads that had rumble strips in the center lane. And he said, why don't we have that on like 21 and 94? And they put, it's like the rumble strips on the side of the interstate, but it's down the center. So when you get close to that center lane, you get that. I've never seen it before, but he said they had it. Can we check with VDOT and see if that's, I mean,
Front end line now, you want me to drive on Rumble
stay
Street?
off the center line.
They've got those all over Missouri.
But I mean, you know, 21, 94, 52, 100. I don't know if the sheriff's got anything to add, but I mean, it might make you drop your phone.
That's important.
But, I mean, I'd never heard of it, but I mean, the service road, if you look at the roads over the years, we've had head-on collisions. I mean, that'd be, and VDOT always talks like they've got a lot of money in that safety line item, so, and one more thing, Mr. Hankins told me today that we actually received a return lease from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries on River Retreat Lake. I've not seen it yet, but I don't think he'd lie to me.
Mr. Williams received it back. There are still some revisions to be made. He's noticed, and Mr. Bear has noticed, that there's still a couple of things that need to be resolved, but hopefully it won't take another 5 years to get that figured
But closer than we
out.
were 18 years ago when this process started.
We hope.
So, thank you, Mr. Campbell, Senator Sugarline, whoever done something. But That's all I've got. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A3 acquisition or disposition of real property, and Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1 personnel matters to review open positions as stated.
Mr. Chairman, on the acquisition, disposition of real property, Mr. Martin recommends a little bit further clarification here. So let's just say tracks in Wytheville and tracks in Wythe County.
Tracks in Whitfield and tracks in Wythe County.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Smith. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Terry. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a good night. We're in closed session. Entertain a motion to come out of closed session.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Terry. Have a second. Have a second by Mr. Cook. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now back in open session.
Certification of closed meeting. Whereas the Wythe County Board of Supervisors has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the Wythe County Board of Supervisors that such a meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Wythe County Board of Supervisors hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, on the public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies. And only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the Wythe County Board of Supervisors. And I'll make that a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Have a motion to certify the resolution. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second by Ms. Lawson. Do a roll call vote with Mr. Cook.
Aye.
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 So certified. Entertain a motion to amend and appropriate $350,000 to 9000-470247 for the purchase and renovation of real estate. Also, to approve the issuance of a check in the amount of $1,000 from 9000-470247 for a deposit on said building.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Cook. Do I have a second? Have a second by Ms. Lawson. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote with Mr. Terry.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
So approved. Anything else, Mr. Barrett?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else, Mr. Hankins?
Just real quick, if you didn't get to see the incident command trailer, it is outside and unlocked till y'all go home. I do want to mention real quick about broadband. I know it's not on the agenda, but we had a meeting yesterday with Point Broadband and Mount Rogers Planning District Commission. They anticipate that they're going to try to wrap up the fiber to the home project by the end of 2023. They will update us on their schedule and how things are moving. One of the interesting things that came out of that conversation is that where there are already fiber to the home providers in the county, they're going to be serving in the same area. So if my neighborhood, for example, I've got citizens where I'm at, but they're going to be passing the same thing. So I'll have a choice as to who I can choose, and I can base that on price or speed or whatever I wanted to use as my determining factor. So we'll try to keep folks updated, but they did express that if you all as board members, individuals want to participate in some of their events, trying to let customers know about the opportunities that you are welcome to do so, and you can let us know, and we'll connect you with the right people at the company.
Very aggressive schedule, surprised me.
Now, in the town of retreat in the town of Whitfield, does that require any action by the town council for them to provide service?
It's largely outside of the established town limits.
Does anybody else have anything? Mr. Martin? Ms. Collins? All right, we'll be adjourned